Well, hello, and thanks for having us. Um, my name is James Hegstrom. I work for the Department of Employment and Economic Development, specifically VRS, Vocational Rehabilitation Services, and I work as a placement coordinator out of the North St. Paul office. So I generally serve the East Metro, which means that that would generally be Ramsey County and Washington County. I don't do a ton of work in Washington County, but most of the people with disabilities that I serve, finding jobs in competitive employment, um, are in the East Met, or most of the folks that they reside in the East Metro. And I do two forms of employment. I do uh, general em general placement services, and I also do customized employment. And that, I believe, is one of the favorite things that we are here to talk about tonight. Margie?
There we go. Having a little trouble unmuting myself, but good evening, everyone. My name is Margie Webb, and I also work for Vocational Rehabilitation Services, or VRS, and my role is a customized employment specialist. And what does that mean? I teach, train, and mentor people statewide in Minnesota how to conduct and perform customized employment services, do consults. I'm also a practitioner myself, so I provide some customized employment services, typically in my area. I'm in the South Metro. Um, and then I run a community of practice statewide around customized employment. And I've been teaching classes since the fall of 2018, so several years. And um, I do presentations around customized employment and answer any questions and provide support around the services for our own staff within VRS, as well as many agencies and organizations statewide. So that's a little bit about me.
We are here tonight to talk to you about none other than vocational rehabilitation services. And as I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite services that we offer is customized employment. And one of my favorite tools that we use in customized employment is the visual resume. And I think we've got a nice presentation tonight that will leave you informed in all three areas. Next slide.
So when we talk about vocational rehabilitation services, and from now on, we'll just refer to this as VRS to shorten it up a bit. We are a state employment service agency that provides employment-related services to individuals who have disabilities and impacts of those disabilities. Our division is under DEED, which is the Division of the Department of Employment and Economic Development. So if you look at the state of Minnesota as a whole, you'll see that division of DEED, you'll see VRS as a department underneath that. There is also our sister agency, State Services for the Blind, or SSB, who provides services for individuals who are blind, have low vision, or deafblind population. Our offices can be found. We have some standalone offices, but many of them are partnered with our career force system. And there are about 50 career force locations throughout Minnesota. And as I mentioned, there's a few standalone VRS offices. VRS also serves youth and adults, but youth are, we have a counselor assigned and a PREATS representative assigned to each school throughout Minnesota. And we start or begin to provide some of those services, pre-employment transition services, around age 14. So for our youth, it'll be that 14 to 22 range. And then adults, are anyone 23 and over, and there is not an age limit or requirement for our services.
Of the services that we offer career counseling. And that comes in many forms. It often starts out with it doesn't often start out with a rehab counselor. It does start out with a rehab counselor. We also offer job training, job placement, and retention services, those services that might be needed to keep a job. Job placement itself it's basically placing one person at a time based on the talents and ability of that person and how they fit into the job descriptions that are put out by employers, and assisting folks in finding accommodations as are needed, and stabilizing themselves in employment. Pre-employment transition services are offered in the schools, and I guess maybe I should have mentioned it as part of the job placement piece, but when it says and more, customized employment is near and dear to my heart. But we basically serve the needs of folks with disabilities in the ways that they need it. And we strive to be a very person-centered agency, and I think we do a good job. Next slide.
So I mentioned those pre-employment transition services, which can be found in schools throughout Minnesota. And so these are the 5 different areas of pre-employment transition services. So I'll talk a little bit about each one. We provide job exploration counseling. And job exploration counseling might be information about different vocations. It might be job shadowing. It might be some kind of career mentorship. It might just be information about our local labor market and wages that someone might receive. But anything related to finding information about careers and bringing that forward. Work-based learning experiences, another service found under the PREET system. It are things like informational interviews, maybe visiting different places of employment, could be a practicum, could be a paid or a non-paid internship experience, or perhaps a paid work experience where the student is actually receiving wages from an employer. So, or volunteering, but really getting that student out and get them exposed in possible business settings. The next service, post-secondary education counseling, is gathering and providing students with information about academics, about curriculum, about different training programs, about assistance completing or finishing that FAFSA, financial aid application, or other resources to support that student in figuring out their career and post-secondary options. Then workplace readiness training includes things like communication and interpersonal skills on a job, some job-seeking skills, meaning how to put together a resume, finding employment, financial literacy, budgeting, money management once people start receiving pay, can include benefits planning if individuals are receiving various government, state, county benefits, how those might impact the person as they go to work, and navigating transportation options. So some of those other pieces that we find around employment. And then this last one, instruction and self-advocacy, might be things like how to ask for accommodations on the job. Maybe mentorship or getting someone hooked up with a mentor. Might be about things like personal rights or responsibilities, or some type of youth leadership. So those are the 5 different categories that PREET services can be found and provided to youth in schools.
Community rehabilitation programs, or as we like to call them, CRPs, are folks that are companies that provide the services that we have just outlined: the pre-employment transition services, the general placement services, customized employment services, and many of the other services that we've talked about. The Centers for Independent Living, we partner with them uh, uh, because in order to serve somebody with to be fully ready for work, there are other independent living issues that come into play, and some of those skills need to be learned. Some of that awareness can come forward through the Centers for Independent Living, as well as some benefits planning and understanding how to navigate the benefits that a person can receive, whether it be government benefits in money or in other forms, and how to work while holding on to the benefits needed. And then, of course, we also have contracts with Career Force, which is the part of us that really uh, employs the state of Minnesota. So, next slide.
So in order to access VRS services, I've put up the website. People could do a search on my nearest vocational rehabilitation services office. It will pop up. You'll see on this particular map here all of our different service locations. And you'll notice that when we get into some rural areas, whether it's in northern Minnesota, southwestern Minnesota, some of the offices, there could be some distance in, depending where a person resides. But that local office would be the office that services would be provided out of currently. And so it's pretty easy to look that up. We divide those offices frequently by zip code. So depending on your zip code, especially if you're in a metro area, that'll determine the closest or nearest office or service area for you. Now, youth, as I mentioned, so if you're still in school and you can go through transition programming through age 22, for those, people can contact their local school or ask for vocational rehabilitation services. A lot of our referrals come through case managers. But basically, this is how to find our offices and get started with our services.
As I have been alluding to, one of my very favorite services is customized employment. Next slide.
So when we talk about customized employment, we thought it would be good just to really start off with a definition. So in July of 2014, the US Congress passed a new workforce initiative that actually for the first time included the definition of customized employment. And so it really is this flexible relationship between an employer and an employee. And it must meet both the needs of that employee as well as the business needs. And so this is really based around strengths, needs, and interests of a job seeker, matching that to an employer who has those needs. So this concept is known as customized employment. And I'm giving some more information here, but this is the first time this legislative passed that the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act had been amended or added to or changed since for several years since 1998. So it was time and due for some new changes. One of the other things that's kind of unique about this act is that it was agreed to bipartisan, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that was passed.
When we define customized employment is an interest-based negotiation between the job seeker and the employer. And I think interest is a really important thing there because it offers buy-in when we're interested in what we are working toward. Customized employment is a process that involves individuals with disabilities and employers the opportunity to negotiate job tasks or reassign different job duties to improve the overall contribution of the individual seeking employment to the workplace. For employers, customized employment allows an employer to examine its specific workforce needs and fulfill those needs in an employee's with an employee's specific skills. Takes a little creativity and a little bit of knowing the business and knowing the job seeker. That's one of the importance of being a good practitioner is keeping them both in mind. Next slide.
So it has some very unique tenets or features, and I want to go through some of those. So as I mentioned, it is a negotiated job task. It is not a pre-existing job description. In typical employment, there's a pre-existing job description. An employer has thought about what they need, written that in a job description. In customized employment, we're really creating a job description, looking at the individual, their skills, interests, and needs, and matching that to a business need or a possible task that business needs done. In customized employment, we assume all people can contribute. We don't do or have any check boxes for work readiness. We take people as they are, where they are at, and we assume everyone can contribute in some way, shape, or form. And it's figuring out how they can contribute and then matching that to those employer needs. Employees often require a lot less supports than we initially thought when we make that good match and we're considering the employees' needs, skills, and interest and those business needs. So sometimes people have said, well, this person can work, but they're going to need a lot of support or they're going to need someone all the time. We find in customized employment, when we made that really good fit or match, oftentimes supports can be weaned off or the person doesn't need as much support because it's based on their strengths instead of other features or basing it solely on a job description. So in this fashion, job tasks are grouped or designed for this one individual. Employment must meet the 3 requirements that I've mentioned. The task, the job seeker has to have the skill base to complete the task the employer needs. An employee must have their ideal conditions met. And when we talk about ideal conditions, we mean what does an individual need in place to be the most successful? Sometimes those are sensory things. Sometimes, it relates to noise, sound, light. Sometimes it's just an atmosphere. But all of us have conditions of employment. And when our conditions are met, we perform the best we possibly can. And then it needs to meet the individual's interest. Individual has to want to come to work, want to contribute, and be able to do that. So if it meets these 3 features, oftentimes it'll be a great match for the potential employee or that job seeker with that business need.
CE as a service option. What CE looks like is different for each person in many ways, but success with CE is possible when we take people as the individuals that they are. The process of discovery, which is the first of the 3 phases, should take about 8 to 10 weeks. And discovery is positive. Discovery is looking for what people can do. Discovery is looking for skills and interests that might need to be brought out a little bit more, but looking for those things. What CE is not is fitting a square peg into a round hole, asking a job seeker to do something that they are not in a position to do. Sometimes the smallest step in the right direction ends up being the biggest step of your life. Tiptoe if you must, but take the step. Next slide.
So as James mentioned, there are different phases of customized employment. And we'll talk about a little bit about each one. The first phase is discovery. And discovery is this process, this deep process of getting to know an individual and identifying their skills, interests, and conditions, and how they can contribute to potential employers. Once we figured that out, we move into phase two, or the job development. And notice we don't call it placement. We're not placing individuals in a business with a pre-existing job description. We're creating job descriptions or developing. And so that's why the terminology is a little different. We're developing employment options for someone, talking to potential businesses. And then that third phase is identifying the support needs and setting up that person for success once they start their new position. With both, we do that in the form of what's called a job analysis. We learn about the job and the business and everything we can, pull that information together. And this is really the blueprint for success on the job, identifying, coordinating, and providing those employment supports.
Why customized employment?
Tomorrow,
Because
there will be thunderstorms with a high of 81 degrees Fahrenheit and a low of 62 degrees.
and it's always good to have a good weather report, each evening at about 6:30 p.m. I hope that wasn't too disturbing. Um, we're changing our approach. The traditional job seeker with a disability would have at one point been part of center-based employment, making sub-minimum wage, doing a menial job, or need staff support, or the staff supports were there based on the group. There are enclaves where folks with disabilities would work in groups, but that has now led to center-based, has led to community-based employment. Enclaves has led to more individualized employment, and contracts have become more business contracts. Job placement has given way to a good job match. Sub-minimum wage has given way to livable wages. Staff support has now given way to natural supports, people who are already in the workplace that can support someone. Work readiness has given way to everyone can work when their ideal conditions are met. Next slide.
So when we talk about the term discovery, what are we talking about? That term is used very loosely in many different systems and within our English language. And tonight, when we're talking about the term discovery, we're referring to a very methodical, scientific set process of customized employment discovery. So some of the components that we follow through when we're doing discovery are visiting a person at home, looking at their personal spaces. We do that to identify some of the skills the individual has and what some of their interests are. Now, you might ask, well, why would you go to a person's home? Well, typically that's where people are most comfortable. And we can learn a lot about an individual by looking at their personal spaces and pulling some of that information from there. It's a good start to the process. Next, we interview people who know that individual really well. And we start often with family and friends, gathering different perspectives about when the person is at their best, when they see them performing, what skills they feel the person has, and how they can contribute to our local communities. Once we've done those interviews, We take a look at the neighborhood. You know, where does the person reside? What's in their neighborhood for businesses? What are some of those potential opportunities to look at for possible employment? We know when people work closer to home, it reduces transportation issues and people are more likely to be able to get to work. Next, we observe the person completing the daily life activities, maybe the daily, weekly, monthly activities. What does this person do all day? How do they spend their life? So when we're talking about life activities, we mean the natural things the person does and how they spend their daily lives. And we do observations to verify skills. We're taking a look at that person's skills across different environments. So for example, if a person maybe is attending a school program part of the time, and maybe they do some volunteer work, we're going to want to go see them in those different environments. How do they interact with people? How do they get prepared? What skills are they demonstrating in those different environments? And then we can verify that and pull that together. Then we also do an observation of the individual in a new place or performing a new skill to see how does information transfer to a new environment? How does that person learn in new space? Then we look at all this information. We go back and take a look and read everything we've captured so far and say, what are some of those overarching patterns we see across interest, skills, and conditions, and what we've learned so far? Those become themes, those reoccurring unifying patterns that we see that pop out at us. And so we identify at least two themes. Sometimes it's more, depending on the individual and what the information we gather, what we find, but we identify at least two. And that just gives us more potential employment options once we get through this discovery portion of the process.
Theme testing is testing to make sure that a theme meets the three components, being skills, interests, and those all-important ideal conditions of employment. Informational interviews with businesses that match the themes, not jobs. Development of a video development of a visual resume or video marketing materials, something that shows somebody doing the things that they've got skills doing and capturing those skills, because that way an employer can see what someone can do and it gives a job seeker a chance to show their skills. And we capture them in such a way that provides the best information for the employer to judge whether or not the business need they have could be accomplished by somebody completing discovery. And then we have a summary team meeting to develop the customized employment plan for employment, customized plan for employment, or the CEP. And that is a meeting where everything comes together. We talk about the different things that we discovered during the discovery process. And what were those themes? What were those recurring patterns? And how did we see them? And when we have that meeting, we have the team there. We have family there. We have supporters there. We have school staff there. We have the person being served is in essence running the meeting and fostering a meeting about themselves with folks that are invested in them. Next slide.
When we talk about customized employment, this is our logo of customized employment, this three-legged stool. So I want to talk about each one of those legs. And as any of you know, if you have a three-legged stool and you cut one of the legs or one of the legs is short, stool's going to tip over. It will not be stable. And so this really relates and symbolizes what we're talking about in the customized employment process. One of the things that you're going to notice are those three facets of information we're capturing. We want to know when we do discovery, everything, we want to learn everything we can about this possible job seeker. We want to learn every interest they have. We want to hear about what skills they have, then do those observations and verify their skills. And we need to know what conditions do they need in place to be successful. And so you'll notice the different colors here. Blue is a warm color, and so that represents interest. Skills are what the employer pays the person to do. So they're green because you can earn money for your skills. Conditions are those pieces that are necessary and must be in place. So they're yellow, cautionary. Now, oftentimes when people are not successful in employment or the employment is just not working out, there's an ideal condition we haven't figured out. Something is not being met. Sometimes it can be around skill or interest, but in most cases, someone's conditions aren't fully met. That's why there's issues popping up, trouble, and a person doesn't stay at a particular job or place of employment. So when we know through this methodical process of discovery, if we can capture all these, we've got a really solid base to move in, information to talk to potential employers about, and make that match with some of those unmet business needs.
If we focus on a person's strengths and we look at what they do and how they can contribute, we can then show the potential contributions to employers. And all of these photos show a person doing rather than just it's not something they're claiming, it's something they're showing, and there's something they are performing through doing, and which can be related to the tasks needed by employers. But by focusing on the contribution that a person makes, we focus on the most important part of that arrangement. Next slide.
So who does discovery work for? Well, I'll tell you, it can really benefit everyone. I have used some of these tenets and components to customize my own position, looking at my skills, interests, and ideal conditions of employment. So it really could benefit everyone. However, currently in Minnesota, we don't have enough providers. We don't have enough trained providers. There are long wait lists depending where you live. There are some cities that have a little bit less of a wait list or more ease in getting those services, but there still are. So we're really focusing on those individuals right now who need it the most. We're continuing to train. We hope to change that in the coming years so that those people who need customized employment services have them at their disposal and aren't on long wait lists. So it really helps those who have limited knowledge or information about work. That falls sometimes with youth or maybe people who haven't worked. Maybe they've done in a day program or been working in sub-minimum wage, or maybe just in a rec and leisure program and just don't have a lot of information about work. Discovery can be the tool that can help flush that out and help a person move forward into employment. It works very well for those who have had limited work experience or no paid work experience. It can work very well for those individuals who have had high turnover in jobs. They seem to get jobs, but they don't stay in them. And as I mentioned, that's often a sign we're missing some important piece of information, or we don't have all of their ideal conditions identified and being met. And that's why we see some of that turnover. It's for people who might be labeled as unlikely to succeed at a job, or people who have been unsuccessful in finding work using traditional methods. And when I say traditional methods, I mean, a lot of positions today, you're just applying online. And so for candidates who have significant impacts of disability, that competitive process just doesn't work. They're not getting job offers and leads or interviews with potential employers. So this customized employment discovery can really help that type of person move forward. And finally, it's someone who can accommodate the process. Before proceeding with the process, we sit down and show some visuals and talk about the process and get that commitment and buy-in from the individual as much as their team to say, you know, this process is going to take this amount of time. Can you commit to that time frame? We do work with some individuals who say, I need a job tomorrow. My rent is, 30 days past due. We don't have time to stop and do this discovery process. So we talk about that and make sure it's the right service. And it is the tool that we want to use to help the person move forward.
And the timing of discovery is important. We want to make sure that a person is stable. So we get accurate information about their life when things are in order and working for them, because that's we want to be able to establish the ability to understand how they're going to be in a work situation. The team has to be on board with the process, and to understand that things need to move within the process. That with 5 different life activities and interviews to be done, things need to be happening on a weekly basis in order to adhere to the timeline that Minnesota Discovery adheres to. And so we need to make sure that the support team is on board with the expectations of discovery, and that it is a process that takes some commitment. If an individual needs supported employment, those supports are available for the person, or person has funding for that type of access. That's usually in the form of waivers. Many folks with disabilities have waivers, and those funds can be set aside for employment supports, which are very important for keeping customized employment successful. But it involves individual allows for engagement with others, with other people. Next slide.
Next, we want to transition a little bit and talk about, well, how is discovery funded in Minnesota? And different states have set up different funding options. But we want to talk a little bit about how we do this in Minnesota and what your options are if you feel like discovery is an appropriate or needed service for the person that you're referring or talking about.
Funding for customized employment. Vocational Rehabilitation Services, VRS, requires all providers to obtain certification to provide customized employment. It's not something that just anybody can do. It requires folks to obtain a certification that takes 40 hours of coursework and a certificate of competency that shows that somebody can not only conduct the discovery, but then do each component of the discovery in a successful way that shows they're not only competent in the process, but that they can also provide enough information to provide a visual resume and marketing materials that will tell employers what they need to know about their business need and show off the skills and abilities of the job seekers seeking that customized spot within the workforce. I have been involved with discoveries where we did not check in advance if somebody had a waiver. And that can provide a horrible gap for a person while we figure things out and check with the county case manager. If you want to know about more about waivers, we suggest that you check with the county case manager. The other way to fund customized employment is through private pay. And next slide.
I wanted to talk a little bit about our process in Minnesota. So in Minnesota, we have what's called an E1MN structure for the funding of different employment services that a person may need or require. So I wanted to talk about that. This E1MN process was created to help provide seamless services in our state. But this is a partnership with Minnesota Department of Education, DEED, and VRS, and our Department of Human Services, which draws down those Medicaid or federal dollars for individuals. This E1MN process was intended and set up to provide this seamless service. It was incorporated about 2 years ago as we started working with individuals who had more impacts of disability who wanted employment. But it defines who's going to pay for what at these different steps in the process. So the first step is engage. And engage is really providing information so people can make an informed choice about employment. Minnesota is an employment first state. Individuals who say, I want employment, should have the opportunity and the services to support that if that's what the individual and or team says. So this first piece of engage is learning about the person and giving them information about what employment looks like so that they can make a quality decision for themselves. That next phase, plan, is really about getting to know the person, pulling together what they bring to the table for employment and or flushing that out, setting up some work goals, talking about what supports they need, and figuring that out so that the service is in place when and as they need it. Once a person has an employment goal and this is formulated and put together, the next stage is this find phase, and that's actually securing employment with an employer. And so VRS is responsible for this particular phase, and waivers provide some of those pre-employment services. And in some cases for adults, VRS is doing that for individuals who are not eligible for waivers or that Medicaid funding. But VRS, in most cases, is responsible for the find phase. There are a few exceptions to that. If an individual is working with an agency or a program and has special needs, and there are already people who know those needs and have been working with them, under some of our continuity of care, we may say, well, it makes most sense for that service provision to continue as it is. But in most cases, VRS is responsible for finding that employment, talking to those employers, getting the employment secured. And then that last phase, keep, is maintaining employment. And so that includes long-term supports. And that, again, is funded by Medicaid or those waiver funding sources. So federal dollars that are brought down. And that's through Medicaid, our system. In terms of VRS, most of our funding, about 80%, comes from federal dollars, and it requires a state match of about 20. Now, these numbers fluctuate a little bit each year, depending on legislative approvals. I can tell you that in Minnesota, we've always met our match. We've had those match funds available, or Minnesota has brought those to the table. There are states who don't meet their match, and then some of those federal dollars have to be returned. But Minnesota's been in a really good place with that. So this is a little bit about what the funding structure looks like and who in our various systems provides those different services. But I will say it should be a team decision. The team should sit down and say, what makes the most sense? What's going to be most efficient for this individual? How do we meet this individual's needs? So really coming from that person-centered perspective.
Big D versus little d. Customized employment discovery is scientific method. It's a set process of getting to know a job seeker. And I think I was supposed to say that CE with a big D is scientific method. It's defined in the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, is a separate service and procedure. It's an evidence-based practice backed by 60 years of research. Waiver language uses the term discovery differently than customized employment uses it. Customized employment discovery is always about taking into account the interests and the skills of the job seeker, learning about the benefits and impact of those earnings will have on somebody's benefit, and getting to know the person and what works for them, what doesn't work for them, using person-centered tools and truly making the investment in the person to find out who they are and knowing these things so that they can be decently represented and advocated for in our labor market. Next slide.
So now we want to transition and tell you and show you a little bit about the impact of visual resumes. We're going to show you a sample, what they look like. You're going to get a chance to see how it highlights skills, interests, and needs, and how we can use this product to create opportunities for individuals who have significant impacts of disability.
Visual resumes work for several reasons and in several ways. And they tend to break down the barriers and the biases that many people have about folks with disabilities, because they can actually see things being done and can often change those biases in a positive way, and get rid of that or the barrier. They can show skills that do not translate well on a paper resume, and you can't necessarily on a paper resume say what it is to change the oil on a car or on a lawnmower or something like that. But you can certainly show that through using any number of means. But we use photographs, we use short video, we use sound, whatever way can communicate and that about an employee is the way we should do it. And it's an easy way of highlighting somebody's skills that words don't necessarily communicate, and that they might need extra time to process information or experience high stress during formal interviews. So it takes the stress of some of the job search stress off. Traditional resumes don't always work with many individuals due to lack of experience or even opportunity to work, access to references, or even possible job loss. I know a lot of folks with disabilities face multiple job loss because one or more of those ideal conditions for employment haven't been met, or one or more of their conditions for employment haven't been met. It tells a story using a person's own life experiences and things that they do. It gives them it gives employers a chance to see a person through their own actions. Employers can translate those skills and the things that are observed into the unmet needs within their business, but that is one of the chief functions of the customized employment practitioner is to understand the needs of a business and to understand a business well enough so that we can point out where some of those things can translate if need be. Next slide.
So visual resumes can come and look a little bit different. They can come in many different formats, and it's really about telling the job seeker's story. And so the practitioner of customized employment, in particular this discovery process, can work with their job seeker to create the most effective type of visual resume. So PowerPoint is an option, and the one that we're going to show you in a little bit is created on PowerPoint. Publisher is another option. It's really about what program or formats that the individual and or their family could access to add new information. A visual resume is something that lasts long over time. You could keep adding new experiences and new information as it happens. You could have a video resume or incorporate some video segments within a PowerPoint or publisher resume to show sequence and steps of a process or completing a whole entire process from step A to Z. You could have pictures, and it will have pictures of different actions. You want action shots. You don't want the person just standing there smiling. You want to show them working with their hands and engaging. For employers, this translates to, I have that task here. I could group or bundle that job task, and I have a business need to get that task done. And that's how we create opportunities for individuals once they've completed discovery. Sometimes it's in the form of portfolio. If people create art, or maybe they're a photographer, we might have portfolios or some pages of the visual resume might include things like that to highlight the person's skill and interest. Or it could be examples of completed projects. If someone does a particular type of project, something I think of as, maybe a person builds birdhouses or has a skill of creating or building something. You could show examples and styles of their work in those completed projects within a visual resume. So there are there's a lot of creativity and lots of different options to create this marketing material that we'll be using to talk to employers and create positions for people who need them.
Some of the key components of a visual resume are, of course, an introduction or a cover page. And that usually involves a portrait of the person and their name. And in those that I put together, I generally say that it's a visual resume, and I find that that's a good way to good thing to put on there. But then there should be a skills and attributes page, and skills are things that we've been talking a lot about, and the skills are shown through some of the visuals that we have. But an attribute of a person is, what is it about them that makes them special, or do they have something about them that would fit an employer's particular need in a big way? Well, we want to highlight those things and make sure that what a person is gifted with and the attributes that they have are represented and brought before employers. But another component of a visual resume is where I'm at, where it shows where I am when I'm at my best, or those ideal conditions. If we are able to put ideal conditions in place for a person before they start working, they can step into a job, and in many cases, do the job with a degree of success from the very beginning. Those ideal conditions are important. Another component is 3 to 5 photos of a person engaged in different tasks, showing what they're doing and representing enough information within those photos to give an employer an idea that they might be able to utilize the skills of somebody in their environment doing their things for the benefit of the business. Those 3 legs of the customized employment stool are represented throughout the visual resume, but the resume itself has to have all 3 components of the stool, which are interests, strengths, and I can't believe I'm spacing. Margie, can you help me?
Yeah, those interest, skills, and ideal conditions. Those are those 3 factors that just have to be met in order for the individual to experience success in employment.
Thank you. Yes, and the greater the potential contribution somebody can make, you know, you want to show the contributions that a person makes, and you want to do it with some enthusiasm, and then having a conclusion or a way to contact someone. If it's not the person directly, oftentimes it is the practitioner that put the discovery process together. Next slide.
So we've already seen this 3-legged stool, but it's really important that this is what you're going to see in that visual resume. All this information that we've pulled together during the discovery process. And many discovery plans will run anywhere from 18 to 35 pages, I'd say. So an average is somewhere 20 to 24 pages. That is the written full summary, but this visual resume is the highlight of that. So your visual resume is going to include these pieces. Now, I want to draw your attention to the conditions. Conditions are what that person needs. So if that is flushed out or on a particular page in a visual resume, listed out as where I'm at my best, and it's meaning what needs does the person have, and it's very specific, that's what an employer gets. You can talk about it right away. It's already flushed out. It's right out in the open. For example, it may say an accessible workspace, or no stairs, or no uneven surfaces. Well, the employer sees that as we're having that discussion, and they're just right up front there, but it often lets us know the accommodations that this person is going to need. And so we talk with our job seekers about what they're comfortable disclosing right away, because in many of the person's conditions, it's going to relate to some of those reasonable accommodations that you're going to set forth with the employer immediately. But it is important that all these 3 legs of the stool are contained in that visual resume, as well as telling that job seeker's story with all those photos. So let's take a look at one.
Coyote Jim, an employee who will get the job done. This has his name, a photo of him, and a little something that kind of sets the tone. Next slide.
So during this discovery process, remember, we said we're going to do observations of the person just performing tasks. Now, Coyote is a young man that people weren't sure if he would go to a competitive job because he didn't communicate. He had the ability to use his voice and speak and talk, but he was really shy. He didn't open up. He would be the last person to talk. Didn't like to answer phones. He preferred texting. Really didn't like to face-to-face or open communications. So, but does that mean he doesn't have skills and can't work? Maybe back in the old days before we had some of these models, but we say, what does he do and how can he contribute? So if you look at these photos, you don't see disability. You see someone just performing tasks. And in many of these, you're going to say, well, that's some pretty hard physical labor. Now, the last one is, he's got to maintain that snowblower. So he needs to know it has oil and gas and that it's going to start and the spark plug was changed. once a year or however often he's going to check that. But these are some of the skills this young man has. Now, could an employer use these skills? You bet. But it shows the employer who Coyote is as a worker. And it helps the employer start to think about, well, when it snows, I need this task done at my business. Maybe Coyote could fulfill that need.
A list of ideal conditions will definitely often begin with a title like I am at my best when, or work, I am at my best at work when and then we list out the different aspects of those customized, those different ideal conditions. Like say, for instance, working outdoors. If we look at Coyote, he certainly is comfortable outdoors, and from what I could see, those skills and abilities didn't happen overnight. So he does those outdoors on a regular basis, or it would be implied that way. Work materials are accessible to me in my area. Completing physical tasks. Some people need to stay moving and don't want to have to sit down or so staying moving and staying busy is an important thing. Contributing to preserve our natural environment is that can be somebody's ideal condition. Reusing or repurposing items and materials to minimize waste, and working on my own or in a small group with few public interactions required. Next slide.
So remember, one of the parts I mentioned about discovery is we see the person in their natural environments. I asked the person, what do you typically do? Now, this was a young man in school. What do you typically do when you're not in school? If you've got a Saturday or Sunday to yourself, what are some of those activities? And I'm going to do that observation and draw out some of those skills. So one of the things this young man does is he goes ice fishing, but he doesn't get a driver's license. He did eventually get one. But as a student, he did not have one. He did not want to drive. So his father or mother would take him to the public landing on the lake he wanted to go to and drop him off. But not only that, he's got to go quite a ways across the lake. So he brings a snowmobile and he snowmobiles, but he collects all his equipment. And so if you say, well, how does ice fishing pertain to, or how do other daily activities somebody does around the house pertain to employment? Well, here's how this translates. So he has to collect his supplies and equipment. He operates that snowmobile. He drives across the lake. He has to figure out how deep it is. He's going to use that hand ice auger. Does that take some physical skill? You bet. He's got to set up his depth finder. He has to figure out, he knows how to use a fish locator. So that's some technology. If you can do that, that might translate to some other things. He has to tie very tiny knots. He has to figure out what is the water clarity, what is the temperature, and what might be the best form of bait, or what color of jig am I going to use on this particular day. Then he catches the fish. Then, now remember, this guy's a guy of zero waste. He doesn't so he only catches what he's going to eat, but he's going to fillet and cook those fish too, because he doesn't want to waste. So he's only going to bring what he can cook or what he can fillet and clean. So you'll learn a lot about the person, but if you look at this skill set and you see him performing different things, you can translate some of that information to potential employers. The other thing is it might strike an interest with an employer. You might get an employer that loves ice fishing too, and then there's this created bond between Coyote, this potential employee, and an employer. So let's look at some other things that Coyote does and how we translate these everyday, daily, weekly, or monthly chores or tasks or things we enjoy doing to employment.
Tree pruning at Three Rivers. He checks trees for disease by inspecting the bark. That's That's I wouldn't be able to know that. I think that's quite an important skill to know about disease from being able to check the bark. Removing damaged limbs, trimming branches that have grown onto the trail or in the areas, removing debris from the trails. All of these things show or talk about and doing different things in different ways, pruning extra growth to promote health of trees and shrubs in the park. Go ahead.
So I mentioned this page about where we list out the person's skills and attributes. And attributes are just personality features or items, and skills sometimes are tasks, but sometimes they're traits too. For example, a person could have the skill of being organized, but you can translate that to some places of work. So we list out these skills and attributes, and oftentimes these are reasons why an employer would want to hire someone. But let's look at this particular young man's skills and attributes. He's artistic. He follows directions to a T. Once he has a direction or a process determined, he is not going to veer from it. He gets his assignments completed. He's just a hard worker. He wants to perform his best all the time. He has a tremendous eye for detail. Like, he can spot that disease. He can spot things out in the wilderness. He's very safety conscious. He's one of those people that would follow all safety rules. And that was some of his fear around driving, just the safety of driving. So kind of interesting, but he would get certifications. He would want to make sure he was doing things right. He's trained in first aid and CPR. He attained a rank of an Eagle Scout eventually. It took him a little longer, but he did make that rank. He checks and maintains equipment. You're going to see him, checking the oil or changing it or monitoring his equipment to make sure it's operating at its best and that it's safe. He's environmentally conscious. He wants to make sure he's giving back to the environment and that the process or things he's doing are okay. He enjoys being outdoors. That's his preference. Loves being outdoors and around few people. Kind of just wants to work in nature. And he designs and crafts handmade goods and things. And so you're going to see some examples here. But the skills and attributes are sometimes things that employer can translate and relate to when we look at this for a person, or we're showing this to possible employers.
Margie, I just want to take a second and point out that I can tell that you did this discovery and that Coyote well enough to be able to represent him in a second natured sort of a way. And I know I've been kind of struggling through this presentation a little bit because I didn't do the discovery, and and when you're adding your commentary, you're giving an employer you're giving them more to learn from, and I love that. But getting back to Coyote, he planned an observation deck that he wanted to build for his Eagle Scout project, and it took doing several stages, like obtaining donations from Lowe's, the department store where he got the materials for the project. He had to plan the pure project and get it drawn out. He had to organize a scout crew for construction. He had to build the pier at Marine on St. Croix, north of Stillwater. So that's a lot of different steps to that process for completing the entire large scale project. That says a lot to employers about different things that he would do well in the workplace. Next slide.
And here are those pictures of some of the things I mentioned. He does check engine. He does check the oil. He can change the oil. Here's some different steps to that process or adding that. So when we think about them, and if employers see this, they go, well, hey, we need that done here. Or they see skills. And one thing about a visual resume or some of these visuals, they don't see disability. Now, I will say that sometimes we have an individual who uses a wheelchair for mobility and they'll say, put me in my wheelchair on the front page. I want that employer to know that because they've applied for positions online in the past. They've showed up for an interview and they said the look on the employer's face when they realize they're using a wheelchair is, oh. So you really talk with the job seeker about how they want themselves portrayed. This is their visual resume. It tells their story. And so you want these pictures captivating them, performing skills, again, just for that employer to translate. Boy, we have that here. So they don't see this young man as someone who's autistic or who doesn't engage or someone who doesn't communicate. They just see him working. And that's the beauty of a visual resume.
Keeps it positive. He has done a lot of different things. He can snowshoe a 1.5 mile trail. He pointed out various tree types by the individual name. He found matching set of deer antlers just off the trail. And then there's a picture of coyote at the lodge where the antlers, where he donated to the nature center for the education purposes. I think that was totally cool. Oh, at Lebanon Hills. Next slide.
One of the other things that was kind of interesting during the discovery process. So one of the things that nobody knew about him is he does intricate drawings. He's an incredible artist. And so school didn't know that because he was in a transition program. Drawing wasn't part of that. He didn't ask to. He never showed anybody his drawings. Matter of fact, he had the sketch pad under his bed. And this came out from interviewing his sister. So younger sister says, because I say, when is he at his best? Well, he loves to draw and his drawing is so good, but he's not in art classes and nobody ever looks at his drawing. So that's why we do a home visit. That's why we do interviews to learn from other people what some of these talents and skills are. So you're going to see him doing wood burning. And for whatever reason, he's just incredibly talented at wood burning. And he makes this paddle for his father as a gift. But people didn't really know that about him, and school certainly didn't, because he didn't talk about it. He was a man of few words, we'll say. But here's again how this visual resume can really highlight the job seeker.
This also shows some of his different pencil sketchings from fishing lures of all different types, sorts, shapes, and sizes to a night scene highlighting only the negative space and leaving the positive space white. Perfect for a night drawing, or the drawing that he did for the Boundary Waters Journal, depicting the fish caught for the weekend, the walleyes. Next slide.
So part of this, we talked about the different components of discovery. So part of it's doing these observations, and then part of it, we mentioned this theme testing. So these are some photos from the actual theme test. One of the theme tests was to help his neighbor build a deck. And so you see Coyote loading and unloading materials. To do that, you're going to see him. He used some hand tools. He drilled some holes. He put some bolts in. He measured. All of these different types of skills can really be translatable to many different types of employment. But this is that process of going through discovery and learning all this about this young man.
Contributions made to a business can be wide. Plant, tree, nature identification. These are the different contributions he made to he can make to business. Safety skills, first aid training, use of small hand tools and power tools. He can trim and prune trees and invasive species, brushes and shrubs. He's got physical strength and stamina in all kinds of weather conditions. He can operate and maintain lawn, snow equipment. He can load and unload raw materials. The pencil drawings you saw earlier and the wood burning that you saw earlier are definite contributions you can make to a business, and accurately measuring links and the eye for detail and observations. Next slide.
So when we look at this, and this is often when I show this to potential employers, they flip to this page and they say, hey, I could use this here. Wow, he has this skill. We could use that here. Now, sometimes an employer say, I'm really hiring for 2 skills, or we're going to create a job description out of 2 skills. But this is how this works. This is how the negotiation process works with potential employers, to highlight this candidate, bring them in and say, what can they do for your business? And then we mentioned we have this final page, and oftentimes we'll put a catchy phrase on it and then who to contact. Now, I mentioned that this young man does not want to go to interviews. He's not going to answer questions, probably not going to talk because he just has more of a social anxiety or fear of being in front of new people. So in those cases, me as the person who completed discovery is going to put my contact information because I'm going to be customizing the job. So it's often the practitioner of the services that's working with employers. Now, we have the individual show their visual resume whenever possible if they're comfortable with that. But, customized employment in that service, we're working with individuals who sometimes don't speak, who are nonverbal, who don't or may not even attend a meeting with an employer. They need some time to be comfortable before we can even bring them in. So sometimes this is shown by the practitioner and gone through. We bring in that potential employee when that timing piece is right. But this is the power of a visual resume. It's the takeaway product from customized employment discovery that we use to go out and customize or create those jobs. So this is kind of the end of James and my presentation about what customized employment discovery is, that end product of that visual resume and why we do it. But as you can see, it's a very different process to go through and highlight strengths, skills, and interests of potential candidates to help create positions and make that match with possible employers for individuals who would otherwise not be employed. I know we don't